Global supply chains have become a major feature now of the contemporary global economy, and they've really led to the outsourcing of production to the developing world, but also, very importantly, the fragmentation of production across a whole range of inputs and services. But significantly, they are coordinated by lead firms, and the lead firms coordinate the distribution, the inputs, the production, the processing, and then the final distribution. So it's really a new form of production relations than the one we're traditionally used to. That's had very big implications for work, because lead firms have a lot of control in how production is undertaken, and therefore that has big implications for working conditions and for workers across their supply base. And that's led to a change, if you like, or a shift in the more traditional employment relation, which was based just on employer and employee. And it's also led, I think, to a fragmentation of work, reflecting the fragmentation often of production, and even labour subcontracting and sub-subcontracting, which raises questions of who is the employer, where are they based, who's really driving labour conditions. The supply chains are often very complex. For the higher tier suppliers and workers in the higher tiers, it's often easier to find who they are and to locate them. And I think it's very important to remember that global supply chains have had some positive outcomes, especially for women. A very large number of women have now been drawn into employment in global supply chains than in more traditional forms of production. And for those workers, both men and women, who have the right skills and can produce the quality, they are often able to get better jobs with better remuneration. But, and there's a very big but, at the same time, the downward pressure on cost, and increased requirements for flexibility, more volatile ordering systems, more footloose production, has also driven a big increase in precarious work. And women especially are overrepresented amongst precarious workers who have more insecure working conditions, etc. So that leads to big challenges on policy as to how to protect those more precarious workers, and what new forms of intervention are required to promote decent work in this new world of work that is part of the global supply chains. I think the decision by the ILO governing body to focus on global supply chains and decent work at the 2016 International Labour Conference is a very significant move, because I believe that the ILO has a critical role to play in promoting decent work in global supply chains. De facto, the ILO already plays a role. It's many of the private social compliance initiatives and codes that have evolved in global supply chains use the better of them, use ILO core conventions as a reference point. The ILO also has brings together different constituents, so it brings together employers, trade unions, but also, very importantly, government. And I think one of the issues which is increasingly recognised is that private social compliance, which has boomeranged in global supply chains, is unable on its own, definitely unable on its own, to ensure decent work. What the ILO plays is an important convening role in bringing the public regulation back into the discussion and of how that can relate to the private regulation that predominates in global supply chains. The biggest of the supply chain-based alliances is the Accord, which has, I believe, 200 companies. It brings together other key actors, especially workers' organisations, and the ILO is playing an important role in the Accord in chairing the Accord and in helping to promote it. I think the disaster in Bangladesh was a wake-up call for many of the lead firms in global supply chains. I think and hopefully it will also shift the ground. I think firstly it really brought home that private companies on their own and private initiatives are unable to address these issues, that you need to have these broader alliances such as the Accord and others such as the Alliance as well, but that's a much smaller initiative in terms of the number of companies involved. And secondly, I think it's the recognition that came as a result that government has such a critical role to play, and that the longer term consequences of not promoting better work, not just in a narrow social compliance sense, but also very importantly, as has happened in Bangladesh in terms of the broader safety and conditions in which workers are involved, really has to be addressed at a fundamental level. So I think, although there are different initiatives, I think for me the key one is the Accord, and the ILO is playing a critical role in that, a critical convening role. But I do think there's still, from all the research that I've done, there's one big piece which I think needs to be addressed, which is the global pressures on suppliers, which comes through global supply chains from lead firms and from other directions to produce lower and lower cost products, are in the long term going to have detrimental effects on workers if they're not also addressed. Now that is a big challenge, because that means addressing issues that are beyond the control of an individual nation state, and beyond the control of an individual government to in any way regulate. But I think in the long run there has to be issues such as joint and several liability, so that different supply chain actors take responsibility for working conditions in global supply chains, and also very simple things, like one of the key issues facing workers is that wages are systematically not going up in line with productivity, and are often, not always, but often insufficient for basic living standards. And that I would argue that there needs to be more pressure on lead firms to factor a living wage into their supply chain negotiations. So therefore I see the Bangladesh Accord as an important stage in moving this agenda forward, but I think we still have a long way to go, and I think the ILO has a critical role to play in facilitating and convening that move forward in the future. So I really welcome the 2016 discussion of global supply chains at the ILC.